He walked into the Alderton Motor Group with a 9-year-old girl holding his hand in grease he hadn't quite scrubbed out from under his thumbnail. The showroom was the kind of place that made you feel the cost of things before you even saw a price tag. Marble floors, climate-controlled air that smelled faintly of leather and money. A receptionist behind a curved white desk who smiled at him the way people smile when they're deciding something. His name was Patrick Hews. He was 38 years old. He drove a '94 Ranger with a cracked side mirror and a heater that worked maybe 60% of the time. He ran a one-bay garage on the edge of Millhaven, Tennessee, population a little under 4,000, and on most days that was exactly enough world for him. The girl beside him was Cora. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a small red notebook she carried everywhere to draw things in. She was looking at the cars in the showroom the way kids look at things they're not supposed to touch. "Are these the ones that don't work?" she asked. "One of them," Patrick said. "Which one?" He didn't answer yet. He was watching the man walking toward them from across the floor. 3 days earlier, Patrick had gotten a call he almost didn't pick up. It was a Tuesday. He'd been underneath a '09 Tacoma doing a brake job, and his phone was on the workbench across the garage, and he had grease up both forearms and no particular reason to stop what he was doing. But Cora was doing homework at the folding table in the corner, the one he'd set up for her after school hours so she didn't have to go to aftercare, and she called out that his phone was ringing. "Who is it?" he said, from under the truck. She picked it up. "It says Alderton." He didn't know an Alderton. He almost said, "Let it go." But something made him roll out from under the Tacoma, wipe his hands on a shop rag, and take the phone from her outstretched hand. The voice on the other end was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to people waiting for them to finish their sentences. "Mr. Hews, my name is Victor Alderton. I was given your name by Dale Pruitt over at Riverside Service." Patrick knew Dale. They'd gone to the same trade program 20 years ago, though their paths had gone in different directions since. Dale ran a reputable shop over in Clarkfield. Good work, good reputation. Not a man who gave out names carelessly. "I have a vehicle," Victor Alderton said, "that I need looked at. My people haven't been able to sort it. Dale suggested you might have a different perspective." Patrick sat down on the stool near the workbench. Through the open garage bay, he could see the afternoon light going gold across the parking lot. Cora had gone back to her homework. She was chewing on the end of her pencil, which he'd told her not to do approximately 40 times. "What kind of vehicle?" he asked. There was a brief pause that felt less like hesitation and more like someone deciding how much to say. "A 1969 Lamborghini Miura, S configuration." Patrick was quiet for a moment. Outside, a pickup rolled slowly down Route 9. "You said your people couldn't sort it," he said. "Two of the top restoration specialists on the East Coast spent 6 days on it. I also had a consultant flown in from a shop in Stuttgart. None of them could identify the source of the problem." "What's the symptom?" "It starts. It runs for approximately 90 seconds. Then it loses power progressively over about 40 seconds and dies. It will not restart for at least 3 hours afterward. The behavior is perfectly consistent. Every single time." Patrick was already thinking. He couldn't help it. That was the thing about a problem like that. It reached into a part of his brain that didn't know how to leave things alone. "When do you need it looked at?" "The Alderton Invitational is Saturday," Victor said. "That gives you 4 days. I want the car there. It was my father's." There was something in the way he said that last part, not sentimental exactly, more like a fact he had accepted but not entirely made peace with. Patrick looked at Cora. She had stopped writing and was watching him. In that way she had head slightly tilted, reading the room. "I'll come look at it," he said. He'd never been to a place like the Alderton facility before. He'd worked in good shops. Back before Millhaven, before the garage, before everything changed, he'd spent 6 years as a senior powertrain engineer at a development firm outside of Nashville. He'd worked on prototypes that cost more than most houses. He understood precision and he understood money. But this was something else. The Alderton Motor Group's private restoration facility sat on 14 acres outside of Franklin. It housed, according to what Patrick had looked up the night before, somewhere north of 30 significant vehicles, post-war European sports cars, a pair of pre-war American classics, several one-of-a-kind prototypes. It was not open to the public. It was not in any directory. You got there by knowing someone who knew someone, and the gate at the entrance had a keypad and a camera, and a guard who wrote your name on a clipboard before he waved you through. The Miura was in the third bay. Patrick stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. It was orange. Not the aggressive orange of something trying to get your attention, but a deep, burnished color that seemed to hold light differently depending on where you stood. The body was in extraordinary condition. Someone had loved this car for a long time, and it showed in the way you could see your reflection in the hood, clear as a mirror. Cora stood beside him. "It's pretty," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The facility manager, a thin man named Coulson, who wore a collared shirt and moved through the space like he was trying not to disturb the air, had offered to stay and observe. Patrick had thanked him and asked if he could have the bay to himself. Coulson had looked uncertain. "Mr. Alderton's usual procedure." "I think differently when people are watching," Patrick said. It was true, and it was also a reason Coulson couldn't really argue with. After a moment, he nodded and left them. Cora had brought her red notebook. She settled cross-legged on a stool near the wall and opened it up and started drawing the Miura, taking it seriously, the way she took most things seriously, her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth. Patrick started at the beginning. Not the beginning the Stuttgart consultant had started at, or the restoration specialists. He went further back than that. He didn't read their reports first. He'd asked for them, and Coulson had provided them, a folder an inch thick, and Patrick had set it on the workbench without opening it. He'd learned that from a mentor a long time ago. Read their conclusions after you've made your own. Otherwise, you're just checking their work, and you'll miss what they missed, because you're looking in the same direction they looked. The Miura's engine was a transversely mounted V12, sitting just behind the cabin, an arrangement that made access a careful and deliberate exercise. Patrick worked slowly. He wasn't performing for anyone. Cora was drawing. The facility was quiet in the way that large, expensive spaces are quiet. Completely, almost artificially so. Like sound had been asked to wait outside, he checked fuel delivery first. Pressure at rest, pressure under load. Clean. He checked the ignition system, pulled each of the 12 plugs, and examined them under a light, noted the condition of each one in his own notebook. A beat-up spiral-bound thing, nothing like Cora's, and set them on a clean cloth in order. He ran the car twice with a digital scope connected to the system, watching the readout while it went through its cycle. Started fine, pulled cleanly. At 86 seconds the first time, 91 the second, the power started bleeding away. Not dramatically, not a hard cut, just a slow, certain withdrawal, like the engine was tired and lying down. He watched the temperature readings while it ran. He watched them again while it died. And then he sat on the stool next to Cora's and didn't say anything for a while. "Did you figure it out?" she asked, without looking up from her drawing. "Not yet," he said. "You're doing your thinking face." "What does my thinking face look like?" she demonstrated. Eyes slightly unfocused, jaw shifted to one side, one hand resting on the knee. "That's not what I look like," he said. "Dad." He almost smiled. Almost. He went home that night and stood at the kitchen counter eating leftover pasta cold from the container because he hadn't thought to heat it up, and he thought about vapor lock. It was an old problem. Not the kind of thing you expected to find on a car that had been worked on by specialists. Vapor lock happened when fuel in the line got too hot and vaporized before it reached the carburetor, starving the engine. It was a known issue on some older Italian cars, particularly those with fuel lines routed near heat sources. On a Miura, the engine sat directly behind the passenger compartment, and the fuel lines ran in a path that, depending on the ambient temperature and the age of the fuel line insulation, could in certain conditions. He put the container down. 90 seconds. Both times at operating temperature when the underhood heat had had time to build, not at startup, not cold, but after the heat soaked through. He got his notebook from his jacket pocket and looked at what he'd written. The fuel lines on this car had been replaced. Recently. New rubber. Good quality. But the routing, he tried to remember exactly where they ran, how close they came to the exhaust crossover, whether there was any shielding. He couldn't remember clearly enough. He needed to look again. He put Cora to bed. She asked him if he was going to fix the orange car. "I think I know what's wrong with it," he said. "Is it bad?" "No. It's actually a small thing." She considered this. How come the other guys couldn't find it? He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because sometimes when you're very good at solving big problems," he said, You stopped looking for small ones. She seemed to file that away somewhere. She did that. Took things and stored them for later, the way she'd stored things, her mother said, pulling them out sometimes when he least expected it. A sentence or a phrase that hit him sideways and reminded him of everything that was still missing from the shape of their days. "Good night, Bug," he said. "Good night, Dad." He sat in the hallway outside her door for a minute before he went back to the kitchen, and his cold pasta, and his notebook, and the particular silence of a house where the only two people in it are a man and his daughter, and the memory of someone who used to be there. He was back at the facility at 6:15 the next morning. The security guard looked surprised. Patrick signed the clipboard and drove through. The Miura sat exactly as he'd left it. He'd asked Coulson the night before not to have anyone else touch it, and Coulson had agreed with the slightly offended tone of someone who felt that went without saying. Patrick opened the hood and spent 20 minutes tracing the fuel line routing by hand, carefully, from tank to carburetors, noting with his fingers where the lines ran close to heat-generating components, and where the shielding, where it existed, had aged and compressed and was no longer doing the job it had been installed to do. There it was, a section approximately 14 inches long, where the fuel line passed within 2 inches of the exhaust crossover pipe with no heat shielding at all. Someone had replaced the line and not replaced the shielding, or the shielding had been there and had come off during the replacement, and no one had noticed because on a cold engine sitting still in a bay, there was no way to see it. You'd only see it when the car ran, when the heat built, when the fuel in that section got warm enough to vapor, which took, he did the math in his head, somewhere between 80 and 100 seconds depending on ambient temperature. He photographed it, he measured it, he wrote it down. Then he went back outside and sat on the step at the side entrance of the facility and called Dale Pruitt. "It's vapor lock," he said when Dale picked up. A pause. On a restored Miura, line was replaced. Shielding wasn't. 14 inches of line sitting 2 inches off the crossover with nothing between them. Dale was quiet for a moment. 4 specialists missed that. They were looking at the ignition. The symptoms read like ignition. How long to fix? Couple hours with the right materials. I can have it done today. Another pause. Alderton know yet? Calling him next. Pat, Dale said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite humor and wasn't quite something else. He's going to want to know why he flew a guy in from Stuttgart and you got it in 2 days. He can wonder about that, Patrick said. The car'll run. Victor Alderton arrived at the facility at 11. Patrick had seen pictures of him online the night before, briefly, enough to recognize him. Mid-60s, white-haired, the kind of lean that came from discipline rather than nature, the kind of stillness that came from spending decades in rooms where other people were nervous. He ran Alderton Motor Group, which had facilities in 4 states, and had recently announced an expansion that the Nashville business press had covered with the particular reverence reserved for significant money moving around. He shook Patrick's hand without looking at it first. "Coulson tells me you found something." "Yes, sir." Patrick walked him through it, showed him the photos, showed him the section of line, explained the thermal progression that produced the symptom. He spoke plainly. He didn't editorialize about what the previous consultants had missed or why. He just described what he'd found and what he'd done to fix it. Victor listened. He didn't interrupt. His eyes moved between Patrick's face and the photos on Patrick's phone, and his expression didn't change in any way that Patrick could read. When Patrick finished, Victor was quiet for a moment. "Start it," he said. Patrick started it. The V12 came alive with a sound that was not like modern engines. It was rawer than that, more physical, something you felt in the floor of your chest rather than just heard with your ears. It settled into a fast idle, and then, as the choke released, into a lower, steadier note that filled the bay and went on and didn't stop. 90 seconds passed. 2 minutes. 3. Cora, who had been sitting quietly near the wall with her notebook since 9 o'clock that morning, looked up. Victor stood with his arms at his sides and watched the car idle and said nothing for a long time. Patrick watched him and understood without being told that this car was not just a car. You didn't need to know the details to see that. You could see it in the way Victor's face changed when the engine kept running, not relief exactly. More like something that had been held tightly for a while was being set down. "My father bought this car in 1971, Victor said, still looking at the Miura. He was 26. He'd just sold his first business. It was the first significant thing he ever bought himself. He paused. He drove it until he was 71. Then he parked it in a climate-controlled barn on his property and told me it needed to be properly restored someday. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He passed 4 years ago, Patrick said. Not a question. Victor glanced at him. 3. The car ran on. Afterward, Coulson offered to process Patrick's invoice and asked what his rate was. Patrick gave him the number. His standard shop rate, 2 hours labor, plus materials cost for the shielding. Coulson looked at the number and then looked at Patrick. That's Mr. Hews for a vehicle like this. It's what it is, Patrick said. The problem wasn't complicated. Coulson went to find Victor. Patrick suspected he was going to be told to charge more. That happened sometimes. People got uncomfortable when they thought they were getting something for less than it should cost, especially people for whom the amount of money involved was not particularly meaningful either way. Victor came back instead of Coulson. He looked at the invoice. He looked at Patrick. You're not going to charge me more than this? No, sir. Why not? Patrick thought about it honestly. Because this is what it cost. That's the only number that makes sense to me. Victor studied him for a moment. There was something measuring in it, but not unkind. Where's your shop? Millhaven. Route 9, just past the water tower. You work alone? Mostly. My daughter does homework in the corner. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Just slightly. How old? 9. He nodded once, slowly, like he was placing something somewhere in his mind. I'm going to send you some work, Victor said. Vehicles from this collection that need ongoing maintenance. I'll want you specifically. Patrick didn't say anything for a moment. What Victor was describing wasn't a favor. It was the kind of steady, significant work that a one-bay garage in a small Tennessee town didn't get. The kind that required a skill set most shops in 100 miles didn't have. The kind that, if it came in and kept coming in, changed what the future looked like, in ways Patrick hadn't let himself plan for yet. I appreciate that, he said. The work is real, Victor said. I'm not offering it to be generous. I'm offering it because you found in 2 days what 4 specialists couldn't find in 3 weeks, and you charged me the cost of 2 hours and some heat shielding. He paused. I don't keep complicated feelings about people who solve problems and tell me the truth about what they cost. He put his hand out. Patrick shook it. On the drive back to Millhaven, Cora was quiet for a while, watching the farmland roll past outside her window. Then she said, Mr. Alderton seemed sad. I think he was also happy, Patrick said. She considered that. Can you be both? Yeah, he said. Yeah, you can. She went back to looking out the window. The sun was getting low, spreading orange across the fields, the same deep color as the Miura, roughly, though he didn't say that out loud. Dad, she said. Yeah, the other guys. The ones who couldn't fix it. She paused, choosing her words carefully the way she did sometimes. Were they better than you? He thought about that for a moment. He wanted to answer it right. They were trained by the same people I was trained by, he said. They knew everything I know. Maybe more. Then why couldn't they find it? He kept his eyes on the road. The Millhaven water tower was just visible on the horizon, white against the fading sky. Because they came in, knowing it was a hard problem, he said. So they looked for a hard answer. He paused. I came in not knowing anything. So I looked at everything. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her red notebook and wrote something down. He didn't ask what it was. Some things you leave alone. The Alderton Invitational was held that Saturday on the grounds of Victor's Franklin estate, under canvas tents and string lights, with perhaps 200 guests who understood the value of what they were looking at, and several who were there primarily because they understood the value of being seen looking at it. The Miura was there. Patrick wasn't. That wasn't the kind of event you attended if you ran a one-bay shop on Route 9 in Millhaven, and he hadn't been invited. And even if he had a Saturday morning appointment, a local teacher's Subaru that needed a head gasket, and Cora had a soccer game at noon. But Dale called him that Saturday evening. Heard the Miura ran perfect, Dale said. Drove it out in front of the crowd himself. Good, Patrick said. Word gets around in those circles, Pat. You're going to start getting calls. No. You okay with that? Patrick was standing in the kitchen making dinner. Cora was at the table behind him, doing the drawing she'd been working on since the day at the facility, the Miura in orange-colored pencil rendered carefully, more accurate than a 9-year-old's drawing had any business being. I'll manage, he said. He hung up and stood at the stove and thought about what he'd told Cora. About looking for hard answers versus simple ones. About the ways training could make you good and also blind you. About the way a 14-inch section of unshielded fuel line could stop a masterpiece in its tracks. And how the only thing that stood between the problem and the solution was someone willing to go back to the beginning. He thought about his wife. He thought about her the way he thought about her most days. Not with the acute, destabilizing grief of the early years, but with the steadier thing that had replaced it, the kind that lived in the background of ordinary moments, that showed up when he was making dinner. Or when Cora did something that was so entirely her mother, it stopped him cold for half a second before he caught himself and kept going. She would have known what the problem was too, he thought. Not the mechanical problem. She hadn't known engines. But the other thing, the looking for the simple thing when the expensive answer is missing it. She'd been like that, practical in the most useful sense of the word, grounded. He'd learned it partly from her. Dinner's ready, he said. Cora closed her notebook and came to the table, and they ate together in the particular quiet of a house that held two people who had both learned, in their different ways, to be enough for each other, without pretending that was the same as having everything. It wasn't the same. He'd never pretended it was. But it was real, and it was theirs. And when Monday came around and the calls started coming in, the first one on Tuesday, a number he didn't recognize with a Franklin area code, he wrote the appointment in his regular notebook, the beat-up spiral-bound one, in the same handwriting he used for everything else. Because the work was the work, and he was still here to do it. And Cora would be in the corner with her red notebook, drawing whatever she was drawing that day, and the heater in the Ranger would work, or it wouldn't, and somewhere on the back road between Millhaven and wherever the next problem was, that would be exactly enough.